But what dentistry is currently going through, it's undergoing or heading towards something called an industry shakeout.
What would you say the next biggest thing is that people are really coming to you and struggling with to get support around?
Yeah, I think, this is an industry-wide phenomenon, not sort of specific to DSOs, groups, individual practices. But what dentistry is currently going through, it's undergoing or heading towards something called an industry shakeout. So an industry shakeout, particularly something called a seismic shift syndrome, is really what we're seeing in dentistry now. It's sort of characterized by a fairly mature industry where there are very, very few first time buyers. So we can sort of agree that in dentistry, most people that are getting dentistry have had dentistry before. So, really not first time buyers, are just moving from competitor to competitor in an industry. And it's also characterized by historical protected long-term returns. So dentistry, it's for the longest time been protected by local regulation, by very, very high
Yeah.
barriers to entry in terms of you've got to be a dentist, or the cost of the specialized instruments and specialized equipment makes that barrier very,
Yeah,
very
that bar of entry is super high.
exactly. And so, what a lot of things that we're seeing now happen is that a lot of structural changes and those isolating mechanisms, which were those market forces which have historically protected dentistry as an industry, are beginning to come down. So, you think about things like mid tier providers are beginning to gain traction in a lot of states. So, dental therapists providing a credible alternative and substitute to some dental treatment. Telehealth platforms like Smile Direct Club, like Candid, are beginning to come to the fore, and we see some of these regulatory hurdles begin to fall, particularly with some of the successful lawsuits that some of these teledental platforms have had against
Yeah.
state dental boards. So
Yep.
we're beginning to see some of these isolating mechanisms begin to falter, and it's putting effectively some significant downward pressure
Hmm.
on
Which is
on
strange for
profitability.
dental, right? Like dental's never really had that before.
Yep.
And I know you understand business as a whole, not just dental. So
Mhm.
what happens when an industry has a top down pressure like that? Where you said a dental industry shakeout, which I like that term, but what does that mean? What happens next? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it a little bit of both?
It really depends on where you happen to sit within this sort of shakeout phenomena. So there's a thing that occurs in a shakeout, and it's called Henderson's rules of threes and fours. What it basically says is that in order to have a stable marketplace, there can be no more than three main competitors. And of those three main competitors, the largest can have no more than four times the capitalization of the third largest. So basically, what we're seeing now is we're seeing a lot of these emerging DSOs come about. We're seeing a lot of competition between established DSOs. We're seeing consolidation of dental practices, not just individual practices rolled into DSOs, but we're seeing DSOs purchase DSOs and DSOs purchase groups.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing is that move to consolidation, and we can probably between us name the big three
Yeah.
DSOs in the country, and effectively what happens is that other people are going to have to change the way they compete and the way they approach the market in order to effectively compete. Now, it's not to say that by having three main competitors, that means no one else can compete.
Yeah.
But in order to compete in this industry shakeout, the two sort of groups that are going to emerge most successful are what are called the aggressive amalgamators and the adaptive survivors. So the adaptive survivors are the ones that have sort of their finger on the pulse and have seen something coming down the pipeline. So they've been able to put in place things that there are three main areas that adaptive survivors really focus on that allow them to sort of adapt and change and survive within the industry. One is resourcing. They haven't sort of let all their capital go to working capital and purchasing inventory and things like that. They've actually set aside some of their capital in order to increase their facilities and to increase their human capital. So, and also leads to the second point that they've changed their management style and leadership style from the historic founder manager model where it's very, very informal in its structure and a lot more cohesive. But as the company's grown, it's required a lot more sort of hierarchy and a bit more sort of formality to how things are managed and run. And that's sort of a function of ensuring that two things happen. One is that you've got the capital necessary to get the best and the brightest, but it also means that these smaller organizations or these adaptive survivors, they need to make a conscious effort in order to be willing to take on outside people who are the best and pass over people that have been within the company for long periods. And that's something I see a lot of dentists and a lot of these emerging groups struggle with.
Yeah.
They feel that we have to reward loyalty, but the fiduciary responsibility of the management team is to do the right thing for the company.